What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be diving into another day here in the MTG Arena free-to-play challenge that I am here doing on my channel. It is day, I believe, 16 of the challenge. Like I said, so far the challenge has gone great. We started with a free-to-play account. We didn't have anything to start with. We, redeemed anything that we could do as a free-to-play player that didn't involve spending actual money, which got us a bunch of packs. We dove into jump in as our initial thing. It got us to get our daily wins in an efficient manner just because we were playing against players that with more evenly balanced decks instead of us playing with our starter decks in like a standard or ranked queue, just because we would have been unfairly matched and playing against people who have either spent time or spent money in the game overall. And then from there, we built our first deck. Now comes the next big thing. What do we do from here? And today's video, I want to kind of discuss how I go about possibly, what's a decent approach to how to go about building that second deck, whether it's in the same format, different format. And I'm actually going to sticking with the standard just because if you're a newer player to the game, you don't want to be bouncing around to various formats as you're still getting used to the game, as there is a lot to take in a standard format, even though the card pool is a lot more limited compared to something like an Alchemy, Historic, or even Explorer. Overall, something's going to happen that will happen and you're not sure how to do is you'll actually get quests like this. For example, we got a 750 gold quest. We need to play blue or black spells. We don't have a blue or black deck as our main deck. Our other option is we can play the starter deck. We can jam that a bunch of times. Probably not have very efficient, fun time doing it just because our deck itself, that is a starter deck, it won't probably compete against some of the main decks that people will play here in the meta or just overall in the field, just in general, just because it is something that is kind of dated at this point because, standard has become this full format, and it's just unfairly matched and you'll probably lose a lot of games and it's not fun to, try to complete that quest while losing at the same time. So another way I like to go about this is, you kind of assess your currency situation, right? You may not have enough wild cards right now to build a deck outright. Well, one thing that you can do, and this is something I do a lot here on the channel, especially when a new set comes out, especially for standard, is I go about and I create budget decks. So budget decks, what I feel like they're kind of like a starting point when it comes to creating a deck or deck style without spending a ton of currency initially to get in. I take a look at some of the more competitive decks of the format, and I kind of pull some of the rares, some of the mythics back, and I try to see what is the best base version of that deck that you can create while having all the good cards initially to create it. And the one benefit here is that we have on our free-to-play account is I actually have a decent amount of uncommon and common wild cards. So I have 34 common, 30 uncommon. So I actually can create us quite a few different decks. I am limited on the rares and mythics that I have, so I kind of have to use what I have if I already own copies of certain cards in the decks that I will kind of explore today. And then, maybe try to figure out what would be the priorities of what I would craft if I had the additional rare or mythic wildcards, and then going from there, upgrading the deck and kind of showing that path. So here on our deck screen, I have 3 decks that are kind of fairly budget in one way or the other, or I personally have done a budget version of them here on the channel. And I kind of already have a list together of some of these decks. I kind of want to show you how I go about the process of taking the main deck. I kind of pull it back and I kind of get rid of some of the cards that are a little bit more expensive that we can't essentially afford right now because we don't have the rares and mythics. And I kind of look and I kind of show you some of the ways I kind of think about replacements for those cards that we're losing in the process. The first one up is actually Rakdos Anvil. This deck is actually fairly budget as is. Sure, it looks kind of expensive, but really a lot of the budget comes in the way of the lands. There's 4 copies of Haunted Ridge, there's 4 pathways, there's 1 Suzokin, there's 2 Den of the Bugbears, and there's 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrants. So what I normally do here is, right, this is just a swamp that has additional abilities. So I'll pull these 2 back, and I'll add that into the swamp because I don't own a copy of that. I'm lucky enough that I own a copy of Takanuma, so I can keep that in the deck because I own a copy of it. I don't own 2 copies of Den of the Bugbear, so I'll pull one of those back, though I own one from my main deck, so I can keep the other Den of the Bugbear, and I'll just add that mountain back that I took away. The other card here is Suzokin, so it's just a legendary mountain, so I'll get rid of the 1 legendary mountain, I'll put it here. And then what I can do here is I can, pull away these Blightstep pathways and I can pull away these Haunted Ridges. So what I can do is I can pull back, and I own 1 copy of this, and I believe I own 1 copy of this as well. And now I have, 1 of each. And I just took away 6 cards. So what I can do is I can add in 2 copies of this. I can add in 2 copies of this. And what I can do is now search the overall game library of my collection. And I can add in, 2 copies of a dual land tap. So I'm going to add in the Bloodfilled Caves because it gives some mana, or gives some life back, I should say. So we're going to add in 2 copies of that, and that is kind of our mana base. And that's kind of like a way that you can kind of see what you have and kind of work with what you have. And then eventually, if you want to, you can always, as you get more copies like Haunted Ridge, you can add more copies of Bloodfilled Caves. Another thing, you could take away a mountain. add an additional copy of Bloodfell Caves if you feel like you want more dual lands, just because you want to make sure you have red and or black mana available. And then the one pathway here, to me, this is kind of one of those things at this point in Standard. You probably don't need to craft additional copies of these unless you think you're going to play some older formats like Explorer and or Historic, just because these are going to rotate out in September. There's probably no reason to waste your wildcards at this point to craft them if you're not really going to get a lot of play out of them anyway. So the next thing we do is we go through the rest of the deck and we kind of look at the other rares and mythics. So right now, you know, this deck's calling for 4 copies of Nixilis. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back until how many copies of Nixilis I have. Surprisingly, I own 1 copy. I got lucky, I guess, from a Streets of Nuka Penna pack and or from an ICR. I can't remember how I got it, but I have 1 copy. So we can have 1 copy of that. I know I don't own any Mihawk Massacres, so we're just going to delete all those. And then I believe I actually own 1 copy of Tenacious Underdog, so I can keep 1 of him. So overall, other than that, we really, you know, the rest of the deck is just commons and uncommons. So these are definitely things that we can craft. If we want to go ahead and craft it now, it would require 7 commons and 4 uncommons. So not really super expensive, you know, to craft what we have. And we just have to fill 7 holes in the deck. And this is definitely one of those things that you can kind of, you know, figure out what works best for you. Now, here's the thing. I've actually already done a budget version of this deck, so I kind of have an idea of a couple cards that we could add in that could work out if we wanted to. Now, a good replacement for Mihawk Massacre that I like to use is actually Warlock class, and I don't actually own any copies of it. So if you click the Scroll of Craft button here, it'll show you all the cards you don't own from all the sets based on that, you know, keyword I typed in, and that card being Warlock class. So I'll actually add a Warlock class. Now the thing is, typically I wouldn't probably add in, you know, older cards, but it's only an uncommon. I do have some spare in uncommons, and right now we're only spending 11 uncommons and commons in total. So adding 2 uncommons that are going to rotate out, I don't see as being a waste. But you know, if you're very tight on budget, you may not want to add them. But the thing is, it's a pretty decent, you know, replacement. It's not as good, but it's something that can kind of help you out, you know, initially until you get those Mihawk Massacres. So we'll first take out you know, the Warlock classes. Now the next thing that we can add into the deck that I actually like that this version doesn't play is Sokuzin, I believe. And this is definitely another good card. You know, he's a smelter that he comes in the battlefield. You know, at the beginning of our combat, we may pay 1, sacrifice an artifact if we do create a 3/1 red construct artifact creature token with haste. And it plays very well with our deck, and because I'm in crafting, it's going to ask me if I want to craft any, but I'm just going to drag in my 3 copies because that card is definitely very good, and it definitely works out for what we're trying to do. And then I think we're actually pretty good there. So the next card that we're going to add into the deck that, you know, I feel like we got to figure out how are we going to like try to help, you know, finish out our opponent. So another interesting card that kind of came with Kamigawa that I feel like doesn't see a lot of play, but actually seems to be pretty decent if you can get it to work, is going to be this card. If I can find it. It's going to be Dragon Spark Reactor. And that's actually a very good card too, because whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under our control, you get to put a charge counter on it. And then for 4 mana, we can sacrifice it and deal damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player, and that much damage to up to 1 target creature. So it's going to do damage to a creature and to a player. So it's definitely a good card. And just like that, we finished out our deck, and we didn't actually have to really do too much tweaking to the overall deck list, and it looks pretty similar. Like I said, the only thing we're really missing is just the additional copies of Nixilis. You know, the Anvil is kind of like the main card of the deck, and that's kind of like, you know, card that we can, you know, craft and definitely have for only being uncommon, as this is the main kind of focal point, because this is gonna, every time I sacrifice an artifact, we're gonna get an artifact replacement, and then we can tap it to sacrifice and deal 1 damage and drain 1 damage. And the other thing too here is that we look at our actual wild card base, and you know, we could actually think about maybe cutting back on some of the cards we added and actually add in those cards that we're missing. So what we could do here is, if we don't want to, you know, let's say you don't have a ton of wild cards, but you really don't want to actually really don't want the Warlock classes, so we can actually take the Warlock class out, because we do have one mythic wild card, and I can't type or I didn't have it on black. So we can actually add in the 1 Mihawk Massacre, because we do actually have the wild card to craft at least 1. And now we just need a second mythic wild card, and then we can create the second one, get rid of the Warlock class completely. And as much as we, you know, may have burned 1 uncommon wild card, it's not really going to hurt us too much in our currency, just because, you know, it's going to be an okay replacement to kind of fill that void until we get it. Another thing we can do here is we can get rid of 1 smelter, and we can add in that Tenacious Underdog that we cut out. And then, you know, once we kind of get closer to having 4 wild cards, we can always, you know, add in the smelters. And then after that, what you could do is, you know, I would say you want to get your Mihawk Massacres in, maybe get 1 additional copy of Nixilis. I don't think you need more than 2 personally in like a Rakdos Sacrifice deck, because it's just one of those added benefits because of, you know, if you can have a creature out on the battlefield and sacrifice it, its Starter Loyalty has that you can create a copy with a Starter Loyalty of whatever the power of that creature was. So definitely not a bad card. Another card that I didn't see in this list, and I don't think we cut out, was actually Fable the Mirror Breaker. It's another good card, but it's definitely something you don't need here, just because, you know, this deck is very low to the ground. We don't need to be clogging it up with having like we don't have to have super expensive cards. But like I said, this is definitely a version of the deck that can work. You know, when you go to the lands, you can always add in your 3 additional copies of Haunted Ridge. You take out your other dual lands. And just like that, I mean, this is a deck that's ready to go and be pretty competitive, I would say, in the current standard, without really, you know, taking too much out or taking, you know, without replacing. You know, we get rid of the 1 Warlock class, we add in the 1 Meat Hook Massacre, and this deck is good to go. I mean, this is pretty cool, and if I wanted to craft it, I don't have enough wild cards currently because I know I don't own those cards. I can go ahead and actually craft it. Or I can craft the budget version and work my way towards crafting the full version of the deck. Let me add in the 1 Warlock class that I just got rid of. Sure. And I don't actually know if I actually... Oh, no. What am I missing? Oh, 4 rares. Oh, because I added in the lands. I'm like, why do I have 4 rares? So if we go back here, get rid of this, and we add in the 3 copies of Bloodfell Caves. Hit OK. Now this deck should actually be here and be craftable. It only requires 7 commons, 5 uncommons, the 1 rare, and the 1 mythic, and we're actually good to go with our current balance that we have here. And like I said, over time, as we build that currency, we can add in those cards. We can add in those additional copies of the cards that we don't have in this deck. And I'm going to do the same actually for Dimir Ninjas and also Celestial Enchantments, just because these are other 2 decks that are actually going to be pretty potent in post-rotation as being possibly pretty good decks. So here, this one's actually pretty easy. Yet again, a very budget-friendly deck to begin with. 4 of the cards come from the Pathways, 4 of the cards come from the Harmony, and 4 of the cards come from Kami. So yet again, you know, I don't actually own a lot of this deck, you know, as I didn't open a lot of packs of Kamigawa. So that's why I'm missing a lot of the commons and uncommons of this deck. So what I can do here is I can also, you know, peel it back and kind of see what I own copies of. So I already own the 1 copy of the Pathway because it's from the Green-White's dual deck. I don't think I own any copies of Weaver. So I peel it back, I don't own any copies. But I do think I own 1 copy of Kami. So I can add the 1 copy of Kami back. And now I have to fill that gap of what cards can I replace, you know, these cards that I'm missing. So if we kind of take a quick look and we want to make sure that we have things. So we have Commune with Spirits, which is not bad. We have Generous Visitor, which is a card that we need. We already have Circle and Confinement. We have Mashako's Reign of the Truth, which is kind of like the big card for this deck because this is what's going to make our creatures that much bigger. We have 1 Spirited Companion. And if we kind of look at our rares, we can add in that 1 additional copy of Kami. Runa Might's definitely good here because it gives our other creatures that don't have Trample. Jukai Naturalist is definitely a good card for the deck. So we definitely got to find replacements for the creatures that we lost. And one of the interesting cards here that I feel like, you know, it's not bad, especially in a budget version. If I just do a quick little search, is going to be the Skyblessed Samurai. Now, it doesn't seem very good. It's a 7 mana 4/4 with flying, but it does cost 1 less to cast for each enchantment we control, so it's possible that we can cast it for like 3 or 4, depending on the state of the game, so we can add that to the deck. You know, we can add in, you know, 4 copies of this if we wanted to, and itself is also an enchantment creature, so it counts for additional copies of it. Another good card that we could add into the deck to slow up our opponent, just because we don't have a ton of cards, is like a Hold for Ransom. It's not a bad card, you know. Enchanted creature can't attack or block, and then they can -7 and, you know, remove it, and then the player who controls the enchantment actually gains a sorcery, and it does actually count for an enchantment count, so it's actually not bad there. Other thing too is that we got to think about our lands, because I did remove some lands. We only have 18 lands, so we probably want somewhere around 21 or 22. And we do already have one we do have one of those, so if we get rid of the artifact, we hit this, we can kind of see what lands we own. We can actually add in 1 farmland, which is actually not bad. And then we can actually go ahead and we can add in, you know, Blossom and Sands here, which I do think is also a pretty good card. And we'll do the same thing we did with the Rakdos deck. I'll just kind of subtract the forest. Oh, you know what? We'll keep the forest and go with 23 lands. Oh, we do have 22 lands. Sweet. So, I mean, that is, you know, another deck that I didn't really take too much away. And kind of, you know, we kind of remade into kind of working for what we needed. Another thing we can do when we go to upgrade is we can add in that 1 additional copy of Kami because we do have the rare. You know, we can pull away one of these cards, so that takes kind of care of that. And then if we ever wanted to get in the Weaver at some point, you could probably pull away, you know, the other cards like the Hold for Ransom. You pull away the additional copies of the Samurai, and you're probably going to get there pretty easily. And it didn't really require too much, you know, fiddling with the deck overall, and it's still pretty, you know, pretty good nonetheless. And I would say if you're going to probably think about it, I would probably, you know, what of the two cards would probably be the best. I would say Kami is actually really, really good because not only is it going to get +1/+1 every time we play an enchantment, at the beginning of each end step, if an enchantment was put in the graveyard from the battlefield this turn, it actually comes back from the graveyard to our hand, so it actually has some cycling ability, so it's never really gone unless they exile it, so it's actually not a bad card. But overall, it's definitely a list that we can build. And if I click it right now, it's going to require 5 commons, 19 uncommons, which is actually a real big chunk of our total collection of commons, or uncommons, I should say, and then the 1 rare. And there's actually not a single mythic in here, so you don't actually need any mythics to completely fill the deck out. So it's definitely a deck list that's also possible if we want to go ahead and craft it. As you see here, we have these lotuses on the deck. That means I have the wild cards needed to actually craft the deck. And now the last deck up on the list is actually another deck I was considering, and this is Ninjas. You know, Ninjas is actually kind of like one of those decks that I feel like is kind of under the radar. It was kind of a fun thing to play when, you know, Kamigawa first came out, but I kind of feel like it fell off. But it's still definitely a pretty decent tempo deck. And it doesn't really lose too much from you know, rotation. Outside of the rares, outside of the lands, most of the rares are actually from Kamigawa because that's where the ninjutsu ability is from. So if we actually get rid of some of the rares, like the Urizawa, I don't think I own a copy of, so not bad. I don't think I own any copies of the Nishi, so we can get rid of that. I think I own 1 copy of this. I actually own 2 copies, so I can keep 1 Bite of Palm Ninja. I don't own any of the Prosperous. Oh, I own 2 copies of Prosperous. That's actually an uncommon, so we'll keep that. I don't own any copies of this. Do I own any copies of this? I do. I own 1. And other than that, that's really it. So we can get rid of the lands. I don't think I own any ship. Oh, I own a Shipwreck Marsh. Do I own a black blue land? I do. I don't own any Cave of the High Tyrants. I already know that. And I already own that for lands. So if I add in the 2 Cave of the High Tyrants, I think we're good on land. No, we're really low on lands. And then if I add in the dual lands real quick, if I add a couple copies of Dismal Backwater, I think 4 copies is probably where you want to be. The 22 lands, I think that's actually not bad because this deck's not super expensive. A lot of the cards are super cheap when it comes to overall cost. We just need to find 10 cards that we need to replace here. So we already have the silencers. We can add in 4 copies. That's actually not bad. We have the hackers. I believe we have the hackers. I don't think we have the hackers. So if we go Moon and we turn off this, we can add in some Moon Circuit hackers, which is actually not a bad card. We can add in 4 copies of that. It's a card that we can ninjutsu in for 1, and it deals damage to a player. We can draw a card if we do discard a card, unless it comes in the battlefield this turn, which is not bad. Prosperous Thief, we can put in 3 copies or keep it at 4, either or. I put in my budget version, I did 3 copies. Fur Master is not bad, and then 1,000 Face Shadow is kind of like the one card that I didn't actually, I don't have copies of. So overall, in the land base, you know, we can keep the 1 copy here. We can add in the Merfolk Wind Robbers. We already have 2 copies of this, so definitely not bad there. Fate and Hope, you know, is definitely a good card. We can add in some spot removal here, which we don't really have any spot removal outside of the Blood Chief's Thirst, so we can add in something like a Hero's Downfall. We can add in something like an Infernal's Grasp. We can add in some Disruption if we want to be a little more tempo and make it disappear. If it's a card that we can add, which I don't own any copies of. So we can add in 2 copies of Make It Disappear. And then we can add in like an Infernal Grasp, which we own 4 copies of, just for that little bit of spot removal. And that pretty much rounds out the deck. Like I said, you know, a lot of these decks I didn't have to really cut too much from to really make work. Actually, now I just realized I'm still missing a card. Do I know how to Spell Pierce? Do I need Spell Pierce? I think I added another creature and just turn off this. All right, there we go. So I added another Merfolk Wind Robber. This is yet again another card that rotates out, but yet again, it's an uncommon. I do have extra uncommons if I were to go ahead and craft this deck. And it would only cost me right now to build this deck 4 commons, 9 uncommons. What I could do is I don't have to add the Wind Robber. I can add 1 additional copy of the 1,000 Face Shadow, which I own an additional rare wild card. The other thing too is I don't have the 1 rat that is, I think, the only mythic in the deck. and it's only a 2 of in the deck if I were to keep it. So if I go here, I go here, I go Kamigawa, I go Mythic, and then I look at my colors, and we can add in the one of the Nishi as well, and then we can cut back something like a Moon Circuit Hacker down to 3 copies. And that definitely could be another deck that can be pretty decent to start off if it's possibility of what we want to do in our color challenge. And it would only cost us 3 commons, 8 uncommons, 1 rare, and 1 mythic rare. So yet again, this is definitely another possible deck that we can explore. When it comes to upgrading, we can just reverse everything we just did and just make that full out version, get our additional copies of our Sortura Umezawa. We get 1 additional copy of Nishi. We up to 4 copies of the Bite and Palm Ninja. Probably take out the Circuit Moon Hackers. And then we just go up to 4 copies of the Thousand Face Shadow, and then get rid of some of that spot removal in the middle there. But yet again, overall, pretty cool deck that definitely can be something that's playable, something that's good. The other thing I noticed is that I actually don't have 2 copies that make it disappear, so I can do it like that. So I actually don't have to use as many uncommons to craft, and we go down to 3 commons and 8 uncommons. But overall, yet again, not another bad deck list, and this is just something where we took like the main, full-fledged deck list with all the rares and mythics, and we kind of looked at, other cards of that ability. I kind of had these deck lists already pre-prepared because I've already done budget versions of these deck lists. But this is definitely something you can do. You can definitely, explore at, if you don't have, rares and mythics, you can look at commons and uncommons with some of the things that have similar mechanics and kind of figure out which way to do, how to make the deck and whatnot. But guys, let me know what you guys think down below. I mean, was this very helpful for you guys kind of like trying to figure things out? Maybe at one point I will create one of these decks. Maybe I'll listen to what you guys think, and maybe I'll make that one deck based off of what you guys think, and that will be my start of my second deck. And I do think these are both 3 viable options, and I do think there's other decks out there. Probably not the ones that are super full of rares and mythics, but you could probably make that are a little bit more in that mid-range of rares and mythics. You can probably demake them and make more of a budget version of them. But this is definitely a good start. And then when we look back here, we're at our back to our daily wins. I am going to just go ahead and actually just play my daily wins. I probably won't record the gameplay just because you guys have kind of understand what my deck does. But if you guys want to see the gameplay in future videos, let me know down in the comments below. I just don't think, showing you Boros burn over and over again is very super exciting. But I figured at least each of these videos can inquire some other methods of showing you how to do other things when you're still kind of building up maybe your currency overall in a process, just because not everyone started fresh, and maybe people have started with accounts that may have not had as many wildcards available immediately, and they're maybe wondering, well, how do I get to a point of maybe creating that meta style deck or that competitive deck? And hopefully this video helped out in that regard. But like the video if you like it. If you're new here, you want to know when I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.